Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm Sharanya. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm Food Empowerment Project's Executive Director. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're so excited to have you with us. I hope everyone's been able to have a restful weekend and that you were able to join us this past week for our Fight for the Ocean events. This week, FEP celebrates 3 years of our Fight for the Ocean effort, and I am very pleased to introduce today's guest to you all. Dr. Deborah Giles is one of the world's leading experts on southern resident orcas, also known as killer whales. Starting as a research assistant in 2005, and then the subject of her graduate studies and her entire professional career since receiving her PhD, making Dr. Giles one of the few scientists to have focused almost exclusively on this iconic population. Dr. Giles serves as the Science and Research Director for Wild Orca and as a research scientist at the University of Washington, monitoring the southern resident orca's health through non-invasive sampling with Eba, her highly trained poop detection dog. Dr. Giles collaborates with government scientists and other researchers to enhance understanding of the many impacts on these endangered whales from commercial fishing, pollution, and noise. She represents their interests with policymakers and is frequently interviewed by print and broadcast media as one of the principal voices calling for the recovery of these endangered orcas. I am personally so excited for this conversation, so let's dive right in. Dr. Giles, hello. Thank you so much for being here today.
Hi there. Thank you so much for having me. This is very exciting for me.
And for us, we would love for you to get us started by telling us a bit about the southern resident orcas and orcas in general.
Sure. So just a kind of quick killer whale 101. All killer whales around the world, I use the terms interchangeably, orcas and killer whales. All of these animals around the world are considered one species, known as Orcinus orca. And just like humans are all Homo sapiens, all whales are Orcinus orca. Really, what we know from the genetics of these whales, these animals, is that they should be listed as distinct populations or distinct species. And if not full species, then at least subspecies, because genetically they are very, very distinct from one another, one population to the next. In Washington State, we're lucky to have 3 different ecotypes of killer whales occurring. We have the mammal-eating killer whales, also known as Bigg's killer whales, named after Mike Bigg, who really started the photo identification, the practice of photo identifying animals, which now actually researchers around the world use for everything from cheetahs to zebras to anything with a pattern. So that's pretty great, Mike Bigg. So those are the mammal-eating killer whales named after him. And then we have our offshore orcas, also known as, they're offshore. They actually don't have a separate name. Those guys are shark eaters mostly. And then lastly, we have in this region, we see the southern resident fish-eating killer whales. They were called resident whales back when the studies first started in the mid-70s, because we could see them here from about mid-May through October, almost every day. Now that's changing a lot, and we'll probably talk a lot about that later, but those are the 3 ecotypes that can be seen here. And the focus of most of my research has been on the fish eaters in this region, but we do study the mammal eaters and actually baleen whales now as well. So humpbacks, grays, and minkies that occur here.
Wow. And how did you become interested specifically in the southern resident orcas?
I have just always, my whole life, I've had a passion for whales. They were always my favorite animals, kind of group of animals. And out of all of those animals, different species, killer whales were always my favorite. And just really, I think that my connection with the southern residents started with the fact that they were the most studied and continue to this day to be the most studied population of orcas on the planet. And so anytime you would see anything in a magazine or on a documentary or anything like that, as I was growing up, that was pretty much all we saw. Occasionally we would see like the partial beaching mammal eating killer whales in Argentina, Patagonia. You'd see those on TV, but mostly it was always the southern residents that were focused. And so, and also quite honestly, I didn't realize we had them in California. Growing up as a Central California kid, I didn't realize we had wild killer whales off of our coast, but we do. In fact, the southern residents also go down to California. So that's just, I started becoming a bit obsessed with them. And oh yeah, that's a picture of K21. Beautiful animal. We just lost him this year. He was a special guy. Yeah, so I just really fell in love with them. Got to spend my 18th birthday seeing them in the wild for the first time right here on San Juan Island, which was more than 3 decades ago. And tried to figure out what I could do to try and work for them. And it took me a while, but started studying them professionally in 2005.
That's amazing. So can you tell us a bit more about how exactly you study them? I kind of alluded to it in your bio, but I'd love to hear from you.
Sure, thank you. My original work with these whales started as an intern actually on an amazing program called Soundwatch, the Soundwatch Boater Education Program. And that's a vessel that goes out and educates private boaters mostly about how to operate properly around marine mammals. And from there, I was hired by the federal government to start taking whale behavior pilot project that they were doing, as well as piloting my own research, which I was able to start in earnest in 2007. So I had my own research boat in 2007 and 8. And then in 2009, I combined my study with another study, which is, you mentioned the Orca Scat Project or the Whale Scat Project, where we use a scat detection dog on the front of our boat. And so starting in 2019, for 10 years, driving that boat with a professional handler, dog handler, and scent detection dog. And then in 2019, I moved to the front of the boat with my own dog, my own companion animal, who was a stray my sister found in Sacramento, Iba, and you can follow her on Instagram, Iba the whale dog. And so she's been trained to sniff out whale feces.
That's amazing. And what exactly can you learn from their feces or scat?
Everything. There's just we think of them as a gold mine of information. One scat sample, if it's about probably 2 mils, so a teeny tiny little amount of fecal sample, can be analyzed for everything from stress hormones, nutrition hormones, toxicants in the water and in the food web like PCBs and DDT, an agricultural chemical. Both of those are chemicals that were banned in the early 70s, but they have incredibly long, what's called shelf life, so half-life. They can be in the marine realm for hundreds of years. And so we study that. We're also starting to look at things like microplastics and the microbiome, the gut microbiome. So what's happening inside the whale, inside the whale's gut, that helps us understand the health of the individual. And then from there, we can extrapolate the things about the health of the whole population.
And this might be more getting in the weeds, but how do you actually tie that sample back to the orca that it came from? Or do you need to do that exact correlation?
We do. Yeah, absolutely. Great question. We do want to know that, actually. We want to know who pooped it out, because then we need to know things like if it's a female, if she's pregnant, we can tell if she's pregnant. Not only if she's pregnant, but how pregnant. So at what stage of pregnancy is she? And that's telling us quite a lot about the overall health of the population. So essentially, you can extract DNA just like you can extract DNA from a blood sample from a human. You can extract the DNA of the individual from the fecal sample, and then that gets compared to a catalog of DNA for all of the southern residents. So we know who the individuals are. We know who their moms are. That's easy in this population because both males and females with their mother their entire life, which is fairly unique among animals in the animals in general. We're learning more and more about different populations where males and females stay with mom, but generally speaking, males or females, or sometimes both, will disperse from the natal group and travel off on their own. And it depends on what population of animals we're talking about. But yeah, so we compare the fecal sample DNA against a known catalog of individuals, and then that helps us track the individuals. And it tells us over time, we and other colleagues are starting to build a catalog, or really a kind of a health metric, a health database per whale. Just like you have a health records available to different doctors if they have the right passwords and know how to log on. I have my own. We're starting to create across the different research groups and adding all of our individual information to each individual whale's health profile so that we can track those individuals over time.
That's amazing. Can you tell us a bit more about what exactly is endangering the southern resident orcas?
So these whales were listed on the endangered species list in 2005. Knew they were declining from about 1995. So between 95 and 2000, the population had just over a 20% decline in the population, which is a huge number of animals to lose. Let me actually take a quick step back. This is an interesting thing that really started me on this quest to understand this particular population of animals better. Back in the mid 60s through the mid 70s, a very, very large number of these individuals were extracted from this population for marine parks. So we think up to as many as 57 southern resident orcas were either removed from the wild and stuck in concrete tanks, or they were killed in the process. People from Washington State were watching this. We're watching these animals being rounded up into net pens, and individuals, young animals, stolen from their mothers and from their families. And the people of Washington State, and one man in particular, a man and his wife, the Monroes, watched this actually happen. And Ralph Monroe was in a good position working for the state legislature here in Washington State to put a stop to those captures. So the population decline was cut in by about a third, we think, by the mid 70s, when the last whale was taken out of their natal waters. That individual, shockingly, one of the individuals, the only individual left alive, is still alive after 2 years. That's Tokatai. She's in Miami. We're trying very hard to get her brought back to her home waters, and the Lummi tribe here in Washington State has really taken the lead in make that happen. We can talk more about that in the Q&A if people would like. Anyhow, after the capture era ended in 1976, the population started to increase at a natural rate until 1995. The population got up to 99 whales in 1995, and the population declined really significantly, as I mentioned, by 20%, more than 20%. And this decline couldn't be directly blamed on the capture era, although there were probably some kind of inner workings that were residual effects of the capture era. But something else was going on, and at that point, the federal government was petitioned and then ultimately sued by the Center for Biological Diversity, based out of California, originally based out of California, and a number of individuals and nonprofits here in Washington State sued the federal government to get these whales listed on the endangered species list. That is a whole hour-long conversation, the back and forth with that. But suffice it to say, the government could not deny the fact that the whales needed to be listed. And so they were listed in 2005. And the main identified threats at that time, there were many threats identified. But yeah, absolutely, Lauren. I'm right there with you. You know I am with shutting down the marine parks. We through research identified lack of prey, quality, the quality of the prey and the quantity of the prey, specifically Chinook salmon. Because again, these are fish eaters only. They only eat fish. Even though there's mammals that sometimes swim right with these fish-eating killer whales, they don't eat them. Sometimes they kill them. They kill porpoise. We're not really sure why. I'm looking into that right now. But the other two main identified threats are the toxicants, which I mentioned before, making their way out of the terrestrial realm, from human activity into the marine realm and up through the food web and into the whale's blubber. And then lastly, vessel effects. So vessel presence and associated noise. So that's every kind of vessel from recreational vessels, whale-watching vessels, private and commercial whale watch boats, fishing boats of all sizes and types, as well as the most impactful are these what we call deep seas, or the large container ships that are taking extracted natural resources from mostly Canada, and or those large ships bringing back commodities, goods, oftentimes things that we don't need, where those natural extracted resources have been turned into plastic trinkets that we buy and think make us happy but don't. So those large container ships put out a tremendous amount of noise. And the way I describe it is, if a human can see it on the horizon, theoretically it's loud enough to mask the whale's ability to echolocate and find their food or communicate with one another. And so all of those three main identified threats actually work in tandem and synergistically in a negative way to impact the whales even more than they would in isolation. And then just lastly, quickly, out of those three, the most threatening is the lack of quality and quantity prey, because these whales are not getting enough to eat. They are impacted by the other threats significantly more than if they were getting enough to eat.
Yeah, thank you for that. As you know, Food Empowerment Project, being a vegan food justice organization, that is definitely something that is of interest to our supporters as well. So thank you for mentioning the impact that fishing specifically has on the population. Also, speaking about us being a vegan food justice organization, I would love to talk with you about your personal veganism journey and who inspired you. What was your path to veganism?
So I became a vegetarian young. I was probably like a lot of FEP people, became vegetarian quite young. I was 11 when the idea. Well, really, I was 9 when I went to India for the first time with my family. But really, by the time I was 11, I was not eating meat. I was sneaking hamburgers under the table to either my brother, not that my brother was under the table, but I'd pass it under the table to my brother or to the dog that was under the table. I never really had a deep taste for meat per se. I love the spices of meat, like the spices of salami, but now I know that it was just, through vegan alternatives, I know that it was the spices that I liked in that kind of meat. But when I saw as a youngster, I was about 12, and I saw a horrific video of I don't know if this is too graphic to go into, but I saw a horrific video of monkeys being their heads being basically screwed into helmets, and the helmets crushed to test for football helmets, so that we were make a more safe football helmet for humans. And I remember very distinctly, being absolutely traumatized by that. Coming home, going to the refrigerator and grabbing a gallows salami out of the refrigerator and cutting off a piece of salami and put it in my mouth. And suddenly I just burst out crying because I realized that there was no difference from what I was eating to what I had just witnessed. And suddenly, looking at my dog, I recognized that there was no difference there either. Gosh, I haven't really thought about that story for a long time. So I just stopped eating meat, full stop. Like, I never ate meat knowingly again after that moment, actual flesh. But I'll be honest, it was decades later, when I started college quite late in life. I didn't start until I was 30. And I met Lauren.
Yes.
And really kindly and gently, she pointed out, that dairy is just as bad. And as soon as we knew, my partner, Jim, at the time, not at the time, he was my partner at the time, he's my husband now. We both went to work for Lauren, and I was a student and busy, but Jim, whenever we could, we volunteered for the organization that she was working for at the time, called the USA, and we were, instant converts. As soon as we learned what the dairy industry was and what it meant, that was it for us and dairy as well. So Lauren, it's her fault. So I think that was in 2002.
That's amazing. And yes, I think Lauren's advocacy and ideas have touched many lives. So FEP exists because of that as well.
Yep.
How do you see veganism tying into your work to protecting sea life and sea creatures?
Well, for so many people, we have the capacity, we have the ability, we have the money to make other choices for our food. For some people, they don't, and those are not the people that I'm worried about. There are Coast Salish people. There are people that have relied on the marine realm for their livelihood, for their very nutrition, for their what they culturally ate and needed to survive. That's not what I'm worried about tackling. What I focus on is industrial fishing in a way that is completely unsustainable. We're not talking about traditional ways of harvesting, traditional ways of protecting fish for in perpetuity. I really see the way how we fish, how humans fish, where we fish, and when we fish is a big problem. And the whales, because I study these whales, everything really comes back to the whales for me. There's not enough quality and quantity food for these whales that co-evolved in the Pacific Northwest, co-evolved throughout the world's oceans, eating salmon, and eating, even in some cases, marine mammals and sharks that are now incredibly depleted because of our human consumption. And so it's the industrial fishing that we really have to get a handle on. I was reading someplace recently that and I need to actually look into these statistics more. But what I was reading is that only 6.9% of the marine world is protected, and that means, you know, over 90% of the world's oceans are not protected in any way. And we're seeing catastrophic declines in fisheries across species. Everything from invertebrates that people are over harvesting, all the way up to tuna that can live over 100 years. We're just taking that out of the ocean indiscriminately. Everything down to things like krill. If you look at Dr. Sylvia Earle, who I know is another one of is one of Lauren's heroes. She has incredible footage of these krill factory ships that go out there and essentially vacuum up krill. And so when we're talking about that's towards the lower end of the food chain, and yet those animals feed the biggest animals on the planet, our biggest baleen whales. And when we're just out there indiscriminately sucking up those krill to put in tablets that humans feel like they need to take in order to be healthy. Well, gosh, I take a supplement for our amino acids, our omega 6s and 3s, and this is from algae that's grown in not in deserts but on land. And they're recycling the water. They don't have the contaminants that you get when you're trying to do even land-based, say farming of fish or other things. It doesn't make any sense to be taking at both levels of the food chain. It's truly mind-blowing that we as a species are not more thoughtful to take care of the planet that we're reliant on. And now, good Lord, we're looking at other planets and looking at ways that we can explore other planets to live on, when if we just focused our attention and our energy right here on this planet, and started living as if we were all in one house under one roof, which technically we kind of are, we would take better care of each other and the planet.
Absolutely. And I love how you put that last part where, it's so easy for us to forget that, yes, we all live on the same planet under the same roof, and what happens to one affects everyone. So thank you for bringing that in. If you had the ability, by saying one thing, to convince people to stop eating sea creatures, what would that be?
Well, I'm lucky in that I study right there, just an incredibly charismatic animal like a fish-eating orca. What I say and what has not because I'm saying it, but because it resonates with people. If you care about fish-eating southern resident orcas, don't eat the food that they need. We have a choice. They don't have a choice. We need to use our ingenuity and our capacity for. I'm lucky I get to live on a farm. I'm a vegan that lives on a farm. I don't farm it, but I get to live here and have fresh produce. If we were focusing our attention on making sure that everybody had access to fresh that grows, in the ground and on trees, everybody would be healthier. Everybody would be richer for that. Something that Lauren started a long, long time ago, which has always really resonated with me. She helped to spearhead, this was before FEP came to existence. Right around the same time, she had people go in and survey GIS mapping of stores to map out what was available to people in different neighborhoods. And my goodness, the information that came out of that study. That is tragic. That, these food deserts that people, and especially in communities of color, it should be illegal. It is absolutely unconscionable that people cannot have and don't have access to fresh food. When we absolutely know when people have access to fresh food that grows on in the ground and on trees, we're healthier for. And it's a way of keeping people of color subjugated, and it is from a human rights standpoint, it's one thing, and from an environmental standpoint, it just adds to that narrative that we need to be focusing more, getting people eating lower on the food chain, which ultimately is a healthier way to be living, both for us, we humans, and for the planet.
Absolutely. And thank you for bringing up that campaign. It is something that we continue to work on. And if people are interested, they can go to our website and learn more about, the past studies that we've done. And then as new ones come up, we'll be posting them online as well. So thank you for bringing that up. I'm going to switch gears just a little bit and talk more about you as a woman in a typically male-dominated, man-dominated field. Has it allowed you to do things differently or with a broader perspective than otherwise?
Those are questions that are hard for me to answer because I've never been a man. I can tell you that this field has traditionally been dominated, and that's changing. More and more women are going into environmental related fields. More and more women are becoming veterinarians. In fact, the vast majority of people graduating with veterinarian degrees are women. And same with degrees that have to do with ecology, anything having to do with the environment are definitely, just in my short time as a teacher, as a professor at the university level, I have seen a shift. But when I came in, I would say it was kind of more like 60-40 male. And quickly, in 2 years, I was seeing it was more like 50-50, and then 60-40 more female. And now I teach a class called Marine Mammals of the Salish Sea, and I just finished. I had 19 students, and 5 of them were men. And that's
Wow.
a lot. That's a lot for my class. And so more and more I'm seeing that, not just with, my class is very, very narrow focused marine mammals. I think generally, I think I could make a gross assumption and say most whale huggers through time have been women. But it has not always been women that have been in the field of studying them. And yet that is changing, which is really, really, really cool, actually.
Yes, that's great to hear. And thank you for being such an inspiration, because I know a lot of people look up to you as well as being one of the pioneers and having been in this field for so long. As you've gotten to know more about orcas over the years, can you tell us anything that you have felt that inspires you, that you have learned from them in terms of the way that they relate to one another or as individuals?
Yeah, so I am studying a population of orcas who are fairly unique. They, as I mentioned before, both males and females stay with their mother their entire life or until she dies. In the case of the males of the southern residents, they will attach themselves most often to their oldest sister and stay within their family group. That's really unique. They also are, which I think is just super cool. When you think about it from an environmental or from a, what do I want to say, an evolutionary perspective, it actually makes sense. These are animals that are large bodied, they're long lived. They have probably over time gone through periods of bottlenecks and expanding population, not nearly to the degree that we see it now, with only 74 individuals in the entire population of southern resident fish-eating orcas. But these whales have evolved and continue to behave in ways that's really, I think, inspirational. And I say, as I say it, I view these whales as being better versions of ourselves, better versions of who, you know, that they're giving us an indication of how we should be. They cooperatively hunt and share food, even when they're starving. They take time to socialize with each other. They have a huge, vast areas of water to be in, and yet they choose to be very close to each other as often as possible. They take care of their young and their sick and their elderly. And I just really am inspired by those kind of cultural traits, those family traits that keep them together. And again, yeah, they give me something to aspire to always be remembering the one that's the one that is, in most cases, hopefully, if anybody's lagging behind, they bring them food, things like that. These are animals that we have, they have menopause like humans. They go through long periods. Females go through long periods of not giving birth. And in most animal species, you don't see that. We are learning more and more animals. Short fin pilot whales now we know also go through menopause. Beluga whales and narwhal whales, which are interestingly, the most genetically close to killer whales. And what that means is that you have what you end up getting with this, what's so-called grandmother effect. Females live a very long time, up to 3 decades or more after they've had their last calf. And that helps them to be able to care for their daughter's offspring, which of course is going to stay with her family, the natal group. These old females also, moms will preferentially feed their adult sons. And from an evolutionary perspective, that actually makes sense. When mom is making sure that her adult sons are getting enough to eat, it means that he's going to get big and old, which we now know that those are the males that are being chosen by the females to mate with and sire their offspring. So vicariously, or one step removed, grandmother is actually making sure that her genes are being passed on through her male, being able to sire offspring whose responsibility is some other to raise up that offspring. So the grandmothers are not only making sure that their own daughters and grand calves are getting enough to eat, knowing where to go to find food. She's also making sure that her sons are getting big and old, staying alive long enough to sire calves that will be raised by other females. So pretty smart, actually.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. And related to that, have you had any special encounters with an orca that you would like to share?
Oh gosh, every single time I see them is a special encounter, especially now, so I'm here today. There was a chance that we were going to have 5 of the individuals, um, uh, 4 individuals, the L54s plus L88, right here along the west side of San Juan. They were seen yesterday. They were not picked up this morning, and I didn't want to miss the opportunity to give this talk. If there were two other research groups that went out to scout for them, so every time is special because they're here so infrequently now. There's not enough food coming back to their summer habitat. I mentioned this before, that in the past we would have expected to see them pretty much every day from mid-May through October. We've only seen them 3 times. They've only been spotted in their summer core critical habitat 3 times since April 10th. And each of those times, they were not even here for a full day. The first time that they came back on July 1st was actually really telling. We were able to get out on the water and try and get fecal samples from them, but they were so spread out throughout the entire habitat. They were completely spread out, searching for the few fish that were, and there were not enough fish here to keep them here even overnight. They exited the area that evening and were seen pretty far out the Strait of Juan de Fuca the next morning. So they are just not here because there's not enough food.
Yeah, that is heartbreaking. Kind of related to that, what can people do in their day-to-day lives to help whales? I know we kind of talked about, the food and the fact that humans can choose to not consume sea creatures. But in addition to that, if you want to build on that, or if there's anything else that people can do in their day-to-day lives, we would love to hear from you.
Yeah, thank you for asking that. I oftentimes we feel that's J28 and J54. Both of those guys are not with us anymore because they both of them were emaciated when they died. She was an amazing mom too. What people can do is number one, educate themselves about issues related to the ocean. Pass that information on to friends and family. And then another thing that's so important, we often feel like we are like our individual actions don't matter, but I'm here to tell you that they do. Get educated, get involved, start making phone calls to our elected officials. Make sure that we tell our elected officials that you care about the marine realm, that you care about everything associated with the ocean. Therefore you're telling them that you care about rivers, you care about any sort of water source on the planet, because all water is connected. It might come down as raindrops and hit a mountain, but within some amount of time, it might be a year, it might be 10 years, it might be 10,000 years, that water will become part of the ocean. Every single thing that we do in the terrestrial realm and on the planet impacts the oceans. We have the capacity to turn back the clock, to do some of the damage that we've done to the marine realm. We need to be able to, for fisheries that is going to continue, it should be small scale, traditional fishing, if at all possible. We need to be fishing in sustainable ways, which very, very few fishing endeavors are that way. But more for the individual, make sure that you are creating situations where start a beach cleanup. That might seem like it doesn't help. It absolutely does. Get your friends and family out there. Do a river cleanup. The way that I like putting it is you get your hands dirty and your feet wet. Get out there and help participate in beach cleanups or ocean cleanups. Plant trees along rivers so that you're creating riparian corridors, riparian habitat that is going to aid in fish spawning. all these little tiny things, it might seem inconsequential when you're doing it, but every single thing matters. I always think back to this commercial. Strangely, I don't actually even remember what the thing was that they were trying to sell. It was probably actually something ridiculous like Shell oil. But regardless, it was an impactful visual, and it was what presumably was a grandfather and a grandson, and the grandson was reaching down and picking up starfish that were just strewn across the beach, and he was picking up the starfish and throwing them back into the ocean, just one after the other. And the grandfather said, "What are you doing? Like, you're just look at all these starfish out here. You're not, there's thousands of them. How can you make a difference?" And the kid said, "It matters to this one. I can save that one." And so that was really powerful for me to see that as a kid. Like, our individual actions can have impacts. And even if our individual actions only impact one animal, that's an impact to that animal, and that animal has a right to live as well. And so any we can do to save the life of an animal is time well spent. And anything that we can do to prevent the slaughter of an animal is kind of it, that takes it up a notch. And then every time you can bring your friends and family into that way of thinking, it's it is the ripple effect. It's you. It's an individual having these impacts, because then if your one friend or one family member talks to two family members, and it's just it is how these things work. And don't stop caring. It feels sometimes where it's just easier to not look, but we have to look. We have to be active participants in what's happening on the planet.
Absolutely. And I love how you put it. In fact, beach cleanups was one of the things that we were actively doing at Food Empowerment Project as part of our Fight for the Ocean effort before COVID hit. And so we're hoping to be able to pick that back up again. And yes, we do encourage everyone to be able to clean, even if you're not near a beach, then any waterway that's near you, to be able to go and pick up any trash that you see, so that doesn't end up in a water body and then potentially harming any of the life that calls that home. So thank you for that. I also do want to add the other thing that you had said before, where in addition to being vegan and not consuming sea creatures, you brought up very good points about aquariums, and where orcas had, from the population that you're currently studying, had previously been caught and kept in captivity. And so encouraging people to just not go to those facilities or support them in any way is, again, something that people can do in their daily life. So thank you so much for all of that. I would love for people to hear where they can get more information about you and your work. And I know we have the website itself, and so we might be able to pull that up on screen while you're talking.
Thank you. Yeah, just real quick, the last thing that I think that is a fairly easy for people to do is to be very, very conscious of the chemicals that we use in our homes and on our yards, because all of those chemicals end up in the marine realm, whether it's your local river or stream, whatever, they end up in the marine realm, and those things are making their way up the food chain and right into the whales. So any time, I'm doing my laundry more, and I use a very low suds eco laundry detergent. But honestly, more and more, I'm using baking soda in the tub, in the barrel of the washing machine, and vinegar in the fabric softener section, and that's it. And with that two ingredients and water, my clothes are just fine. If you've got some, if you're doing something that soils your laundry a little bit more than that, you're gardening or whatever, use a biodegradable, non-toxic, non-scented, if at all possible, laundry detergent. But otherwise, go for the cheap, super cheap and very effective baking soda and vinegar. Don't put them together at the same time or you'll kind of have an explosion, and it actually ends up neutralizing each other and they don't work as well. So if you put a cup of baking soda in the barrel of the washing machine, add your clothes, put however much your laundry detergent, fabric softener section will hold, and then regular wash, and it's been fantastic. It will make your white whiter than they normally are.
Yes, that's a great tip. And that's actually something I do use at home as well. And baking powder and baking soda and vinegar are just so powerful when it comes to so many things, even grease in the kitchen. So it's great.
Yep.
Thank you for sharing that as well. It's a very practical way for people to be able to help.
And cheap.
Yes.
So back to the where to go. Our website, Wild Orca, our biggest campaign was called the Fair Fisheries campaign. And what that is that's asking people to recognize the Southern residents as a major stakeholder in fisheries management decisions. I view the Southern residents as the original harvesters of Pacific salmon, and as such, they should have a place at the table. Right, the only fish are divvied up for human consumption alone, and we should be leaving enough in the water for these whales to recover, and not just recover, but grow their population back to what it was before we decimated them by the removals. And so that's a of what we have right now.
That's great. Oh, we have a comment. I also wash clothes with similar stuff. I add a few drops of essential oil to the vinegar and a mix of citruses because vinegar is hard on my nose. That's a great idea. Thank you for sharing.
That is great. I have to say, when I'm doing laundry, suddenly, like, I have the Pavlovian thing, like, oh my gosh, I need a salad. It's crazy. I love vinegar.
Yes.
I drink it straight, but I love that idea of the essential oil.
It's very strong. So I will take the essential oil route for sure. Thank you for that. We're gonna check if there are any questions that we can answer. And I'm just going to read out some of the comments that we're getting as well. So Mark says, thank you, Dr. Giles, for your time today and your advocacy on behalf of orcas. And thanks to me for the question. So thank you, Mark, for your comment. Let's see. Was there less vehicle runoff, oil, into Puget Sound during COVID due to less traffic? Did the health of whales in Puget Sound improve during COVID or worsen due to more boat traffic? Thank you for that great question.
Yeah, that is great. Well, when COVID first hit and the state went up down on March 23rd, there was about a month or so where it was a significant decrease in vehicle traffic on the roads and highways. So absolutely, that was better. Same with vessel traffic for about a month. But I will say that as the state started opening up to some degree, where we were advised that we could be out with our families or with our pod, or I call them pods, our bubble within just a few people. What ended up happening, at least in Washington state, is that we actually had a vast increase in boat sales. So private boat sales went up by 30, I've heard as much as 33% in 2020. And that actually had pretty negative impacts to the whales, because for the first time, for a lot of cases, you had people that were boating that had never boated before. So you had people that had no idea that what they were doing, and or they had no that they were in whale waters. These are I call them whale waters. My go-to is that you should assume that there are whales in the water near where you are and proceed with caution. That is not how people were behaving with this increase of vessels. And so it doesn't seem like it's quite as crowded now. But and then as far as the car traffic, I think we're right back up where we were, you know, unfortunately. That said, I think that, which is kind of surprising given that so many more people are still working from home. But yeah, I haven't looked into it recently, but there was a period of time where we could geez Louise, you could see the smog in LA had completely disappeared after COVID. If that didn't tell people something, I don't know what will.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think various researchers have studied specific populations of animals and the impacts of people just being on complete lockdown. And it was quite amazing to see how different populations were either coming back or, being more able to represent or able to present their natural behaviors because there wasn't that human influence. So
Right,
it was
right.
amazing to see.
But then in other populations where when people started getting out and about, people started coming, I live on an island here and our tourism has skyrocketed since COVID. In the summertime, it always is higher in the summertime here, but I mean about in April, May, June, all the way through, and we have not slowed down with people coming here because because it's beautiful and people are outside. And so our island here has been very much impacted by additional people coming here, and within national parks, state parks, things like that. The animals are actually showing a stress response now.
Oh, that is just heartbreaking. Thank you for sharing that. Let's check if we have any more questions online. Is Dr. Giles involved, either as a member or public commenter, on the Washington Southern Resident Orca Task Force? It seems like fishing/fisheries and whale watching are overrepresented.
I was on the governor's task force that has since been disbanded. It's no longer happening. I was on the vessel work group and the prey work group. And the fisheries, in my opinion, didn't get nearly enough attention. Whale watching got a tremendous amount of attention. The whale watch community, the whale watching industry in this state has been heavily um, uh, what do I want to say, regulated at this point, to the degree that I really feel it's any more attention put on whale watching, whether it's private or commercial, is the federal government dragging their heels for focusing on other things that they need to be focusing on, like making sure that the whales have enough to eat. And honestly, I'm a proponent of wild fish. I am not a proponent of artificial fish, like fish farms, things like that. Hatcheries done well. That's kind of straddling that line, but we really need to be focusing on habitat restoration, protecting habitat that is still pristine, if you can say that there's any pristine habitat, undeveloped habitat, protecting that from further development, recovering riparian corridors, estuaries, things like that fish are desperately needing and increasingly losing, not only from and human habitat destruction, but from climate change. And so when we're talking about rivers that are dammed, especially rivers that have dams on rivers that have cold headwaters, high elevation and cold headwaters above where the dams are, we need to be focusing on removing dams that are blocking fish passage.
Yeah, and I think we will have one last question before we wrap this up. And we're getting hearts and love from various listeners. Thank you. I think there was a question about whale watching specifically and potentially the impacts on the whales. Is that something that you can speak to, Dr. Giles?
Sure. I actually did my master's and PhD asking questions about changes of behavior, whether or not whales' behavior changed in as a result of whale watching. So I'm and the Soundwatch Boater Education Program is very much about whale watching. My opinion about whale watching is that the professional whale watchers in the US and Canada in the Salish Sea, there are that is a professional organization that has stepped up to the table. They are an incredibly educated group of people. They are doing education outreach on the water. And with regard to the southern residents, they are highly regulated. You actually, in Canada, you can't watch southern residents. If you're a commercial whale watch boat, you can't watch them. And in the US, the professional whale watchers are limited to, it's actually, going to be honest here, hard for me to remember exactly what it was, but something like there are two-hour periods of time. And I think it's maybe not even every day of the week, but two-hour periods of time that professional whale watchers can go out there and watch whales. And if company A has a boat out in the morning, that company A cannot have a boat out in the afternoon. And so this is a way to limit the number of boats that are around the whales, and limit the amount of time that boats are around whales. Other regulations that have gone into effect is that boats are going less than 7 knots within a kilometer of the whales. We know from acoustic studies that a fast running boat is significantly louder than a boat that's going slower. So there are a lot of different things that the professional whale watching community voluntarily do extra measures to limit their impact to the whales, and then these additional measures that went into place as a result of the governor's task force here in Washington State and other regulations in Canada. Canada has actually taken a really hard stance on fishing and has ended recreational and I do believe commercial fishing in Canadian waters for Chinook salmon because of the southern residents this year. And it'll be really interesting to see what happens in years forward. But I would like to see Washington State take some additional measures, at least while the fish recover. For the fish's sake itself. I mean, so many of the different runs of salmon are on the endangered species list. And so when you talk about these salmon that are decimated, and then the whales that are reliant on them for their very survival, I'd like to see some additional measures in Washington. Really quickly, I have no idea how who's on the call or who's on this Zoom or thing. We here in Washington have a tendency to claim the southern resident fish-eating orcas as our whales because in the past they have been mostly seen here. That being said, these whales are known to range all the way down. Their range is all the way down to Monterey, California. So these are Washington's whales, Oregon's whales, and California's whales in the U.S., and they're BC Canada's whales in Canada. And so anything that people are doing, especially along the Pacific coast, any sort of activities that have the potential to impact the whales, both positively or negatively, makes a difference. So get out there and do beach cleanups in Washington, Oregon, and California, and have a direct impact on the health of these whales and other whales and other marine mammals.
Yes, thank you for that. I believe this is a follow-up to what you were mentioning before. How is Canada regulating that?
They're doing a lot of regulation. Actually, one of the really interesting things that they're doing is that they're buying back commercial fishing licenses, and they're not intending to resell them. So they're shrinking the total number of humans that are able to be out there legally harvesting from the marine realm. So I think that's an incredibly interesting concept. one I love. Another thing is that they're patrolling the waters both on the water with patrol boats, and they have purchased a number of planes to do aerial scanning from the sky, see if people are fishing in the no fishing zones.
That's great. Thank you so much for that. Just looking at the time, we are over, but we got some great questions that we wanted to make sure we got in. So thank you for being a little bit flexible with that. Thank you so much, Dr. Giles, for your insight, for opening your heart, and for being so honest and open during this conversation, and for all of the amazing work that you're doing. We really appreciate you joining us and sharing everything that you did with us today. Thank you so much. And thanks to everyone who was listening and who was able to join us. And enjoy the rest of your Sunday, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for, it's been great getting to know you a little bit while we prepped for this. And yeah, I just love that I was able to do this for Lauren's organization and now all of your organizations. So thank you for the work you guys do.
Thank you so much. Thank you.